If you are past 60 and you have gone 3 days, 4 days, sometimes 5 without a bowel movement, I need you to stay right here for the next few minutes. What is sitting inside your body during those still days is not simply discomfort. It is quietly working against your energy, your mental clarity, and your immune defenses. And the reason it keeps happening to you after 60 is something no laxative on any pharmacy shelf is designed to address. My name is Rebecca Yoder. Come sit with me a while. For 65 years, I have cared for neighbors and family the way my mother cared for hers and her mother before her. Through food, through roots, through fermented things, through wisdom passed down through 5 generations of women in our Lancaster County community. My grandmother used to say that all sickness begins in the belly. She did not read that in a book. She watched it, table after table, neighbor after neighbor, across a lifetime spent in this valley. But before I tell you what she saw and what our tradition has practiced for generations, I want to share something that took me many years to understand clearly because it changes how you make sense of everything that follows. By the time a woman reaches 65, the beneficial bacterial community living in her gut has, in most cases, already lost close to half its members. Not because of anything she did wrong, because of the accumulated effect of antibiotics over the years, processed food, chlorinated water, years without fermented things, and the natural attrition of a long life. By 70, that loss is closer to 50% in the majority of adults who have not actively worked to restore what was taken. And here is why that number matters so much to what you are feeling right now. Those bacteria are not passengers. They produce the compounds the cells lining your colon use as fuel. When those cells are well fueled, they contract consistently and material moves. When they are starved of that fuel, the colon slows, material sits, and the gut wall that was designed to keep certain things on one side begins to thin and become less forgiving. This is what my grandmother watched across decades of plain living. The women who kept their microbial community alive through fermented food and traditional practice stayed regular, clear-headed, and energetic into their 80s. The ones who did not suffered first in the gut, then everywhere else. The laboratories are only now catching up to what 5 generations of watching had long since settled, friends. In a few moments, I am going to share what actually gets a quiet gut moving again. And one of the things I tell you will genuinely surprise you. 9 out of 10 neighbors who come to me with this problem have been reaching for the wrong thing first. And the order in which these steps are applied matters as much as the steps themselves, because each one prepares the body for the next. Stay through to the end. What I have saved for last is the single most important piece I can offer any person past 60 whose gut has gone quiet. Before we go any further, leave me a comment below and tell me your age. And tell me this: how many days typically pass between bowel movements for you? And have you ever noticed those still days affecting your thinking or your energy? I read every comment on this channel. Your answers shape what I bring to you next. Now let me start where you are right now. Your belly feels full and heavy even when you have not eaten much. There is a pressure low in your abdomen that settles in and stays. You have a dull ache in your lower back that you have been blaming on the chair. Your appetite has gone flat. Your mornings feel slow before you have even stood from the bed. By midday, you feel bloated in a way you cannot explain. Your thinking feels a little clouded, a little removed from the day, as though you are watching it through glass. You sit across from someone you love and find yourself only half present. You have been telling yourself this is simply age. You have been telling yourself this is simply how things are now. It is not. These are not separate complaints. They are one complaint, coming from the same place. What you are experiencing is a body managing a burden the gut was designed to expel. And every still day that passes, that burden compounds in ways most people never see until they have been paid for a long time. Here is what is actually happening inside the body during those still days, because this is the part that a rushed 10-minute appointment leaves no room for. The large intestine is lined with a mucosal wall, a barrier that separates the contents of the gut from the rest of the body. When digested waste sits pressed against that wall for more than 24 to 48 hours, the bacteria in that sitting material begin producing compounds called endotoxins. As those compounds accumulate in close contact with the mucosal lining, small gaps open in that barrier, and your body begins quietly absorbing what it was designed to expel. My grandmother called it the body drinking from its own waste. She said it with the gravity of a woman who had watched neighbors dismiss their bowel habits until something else went wrong entirely. Think of wet leaves pressed against the side of a wooden barn. A dry pile on a summer afternoon does no harm, but let that same pile sit soaked and fermenting for 3 days, and it begins working its way into the wood. The gut wall behaves exactly the same way, and after 60, this process becomes more pronounced for 2 reasons working together. The smooth muscle contractions that push material through the intestines slow by roughly 30 to 40% across a lifetime. The gut moves less at exactly the age when the gut wall has thinned and become less forgiving. If you are managing blood pressure or blood sugar, or if you take blood thinners of any kind, please speak with your doctor before making significant dietary changes, because shifts in gut function can affect how the body processes several medications. But here is what I want you to hold on to. There is a path forward, and it begins with knowing which forces are making this harder than it should be. 3 forces worsen this hidden process, and most of us in this age bracket are feeding all 3 without realizing it. The first is stillness after meals. A gentle walk of 20 to 30 minutes after supper, just around the block or down the lane, stimulates the nerve pathways that keep digestion moving forward. Our folks always walked after meals because the day called for it. The chickens needed tending or the garden had one more thing to do. This one habit alone helps more neighbors than almost any other single change I suggest. The second is a diet too low in traditional fats. Many folks our age cut fat from their meals on old advice and never went back. But fat, the kind found in bone broth and in traditionally prepared foods, is what stimulates the bile the intestines need to push material forward. Without it, the gut runs dry and slow. The third force is the one that reaches into everything else. It is the loss of the microbial community I described, the community that has been steadily thinning since your 50s, and the one most people in this situation are never told about at all. When those workers are depleted, the first 2 forces help, but they cannot fully compensate for what is missing at the cellular level. And this is where most people stay stuck, doing the right things and still not getting all the way there. I think of Ruth here. Ruth is 68, a retired bookkeeper from Boise, Idaho. She came to me having gone sometimes 5 or 6 days between movements for 3 years, having tried everything the pharmacy offered. What we found together was surprisingly simple. Ruth spent every evening in her recliner from supper until bedtime. We changed one thing. She began walking 20 minutes after her evening meal. Within 10 days, she was moving daily. Within 3 weeks, her afternoon energy had improved by roughly 40%. She told me, "Rebecca, I cannot believe something that simple was all it needed." For Ruth, that first step was enough. Ruth had not been through a decade of antibiotic use or years of convenience foods. Her microbial reserves were still reasonably intact. But for many of the women who come to me, the walking and the bone broth and the better fat get them most of the way home, not all of it. And the gap that remains is the piece I am most asked about. Before I tell you how to close that gap, there is one small thing I want to ask. If you have found this helpful so far, would you take a moment to subscribe? It costs nothing, and it allows this channel to reach more neighbors who need this information. I bring something new here every week. Now let me continue. Recovery follows a clear order, and that order matters as much as the steps themselves. Begin with warm water first thing every morning before food or anything else. 8 ounces, as warm as a mild cup of tea. Add a small pinch of good salt. Warm water draws fluid back into the large intestine and softens what has been accumulating there. The salt supports the sodium balance the gut needs to contract properly. Next, bring a prebiotic food to your evening meal. Onion, garlic, leek, or the green tops of spring onions stirred into whatever you are already cooking. These feed the microbial community in ways that packaged fiber supplements replicate poorly because they arrive in food, which is the form the body has always expected to receive them. Dorothy is 71, a retired school teacher from Chattanooga, Tennessee. She came to me after years of what she called barely going, sometimes 4 or 5 days between movements, and a mental fog she had accepted as simply part of getting older. What was being overlooked was her near-complete absence of fermented foods. She had eaten them as a girl, then stopped when her family moved toward convenience foods decades earlier. We brought sauerkraut from the crock back to her table, 2 tablespoons before the evening meal, along with bone broth in the mornings and a short walk after supper. Within 3 weeks, her pattern had shifted to daily movement. Within 6 weeks, the fog she had carried for 2 years had lifted by roughly 60%. "Rebecca," she told me, "I did not realize how much of what I thought was aging was actually my body asking for something it used to get." But Dorothy's microbial reserves, though depleted, still had enough working members for the fermented food to take hold quickly. What happens when the depletion has gone deeper? When years of antibiotics and a long absence of fermented things have taken a larger toll. This is the thing I have taken the longest to say plainly, friends, because it took me a long time to satisfy myself that I had found something worth saying it about. Restoring the gut after significant depletion requires 3 things working together, and all 3 must be present. The living bacteria themselves, the prebiotic fiber they need to eat and survive, and the postbiotics, the actual healing compounds the bacteria produce once they are fed and active. Postbiotics are what repair the gut lining, calm the inflammation that slows contraction, and signal the bowel to begin moving material consistently again. Think of it like a kitchen garden in heavy clay soil. Seeds alone do nothing without good compost and steady water. The seeds are the bacteria. The compost is the prebiotic food. The water, in this case, is the postbiotic environment that allows everything else to take root. After 60, the community that should be producing those postbiotic compounds has lost close to half its workers. No single element, given without the other 2, can do the full work. I spent 2 years looking for something that addressed all 3 in the right form and the right combination. I was skeptical of supplements. I still am, about most of them. What I kept encountering were products with probiotics but no prebiotic support for those bacteria to survive on, or products with living cultures but nothing to help them produce the postbiotic compounds the gut lining actually depends on. None of them were built the way the problem actually works. BoochBod is the first thing I have found that addresses all 3 together. It contains lactospore, a clinically studied probiotic strain, alongside the prebiotic fiber those strains need to survive, and postbiotics LM1004, the postbiotic compounds that begin supporting the gut lining from the first serving. It also contains dandelion root, which the women of our Lancaster County community have kept in the root cellar for a sluggish gut since my grandmother's time, and for good reason. Over 30,000 people are already using it. I would not recommend it here if I had not spent that time satisfying myself that it was built the way the problem actually requires. And here is the one practical thing that matters quietly for many of us in this age bracket. It comes as a gummy, not a capsule. I have sat across from older women managing 4 or 5 supplements who had quietly stopped taking 2 of them because one more pill was one more thing they could not make themselves do every morning. A gummy you actually want to take is not a small distinction. It is the difference between a habit that holds and one that quietly disappears. The link is in the description below. There is a 60-day guarantee on your first order, so you have nothing to lose in finding out if it works for your body. And please speak with your doctor before beginning any supplement, particularly if you are managing blood pressure, blood sugar, or blood thinners. Now I have arrived at what I have been saving for last. In our community, we have never needed a complicated name for this. We call it living food. Lacto-fermented vegetables, made the plain way in salted water with nothing else added. Kraut from the crock, fermented beets, fermented green beans. The kind that takes 5 to 7 days in a clay crock, where the brine slowly clouds over and the smell when you lift the lid tells you something alive is working inside. Here is what happens in the body when living food arrives. Lacto-fermented vegetables deliver lactobacillus strains in numbers that are difficult to replicate through capsules alone. A single tablespoon of traditionally fermented sauerkraut carries more living bacterial culture than many commercial probiotic products. And the brine itself carries short-chain fatty acids, the compounds the cells lining the colon use directly as fuel. When those cells are well fueled, they contract consistently and material moves forward. When they are starved, material accumulates, the mucosal wall thins, and what the body was designed to keep on one side begins to cross over. Researchers who came to study communities like ours left with data confirming what 4 generations of plain living had already demonstrated. Rates of chronic constipation and related colon conditions in communities that kept their fermented food traditions were measurably lower than in surrounding populations. The laboratories spent decades trying to isolate what we had been delivering in a spoonful from a clay crock. Our tradition had nothing to prove to them. Frances is 77, a retired bakery owner from Cedar Rapids, Iowa. She came to me after 4 years of what she described as a system that just sits. She had tried fiber supplements and prescription softeners that helped briefly and then stopped working entirely. What had been overlooked was that Frances had not eaten a fermented food since her mother's table, and she had been through 5 separate rounds of antibiotics in her 60s for recurring sinus infections. Her microbial community had been significantly depleted. Frances began with 2 tablespoons of fresh sauerkraut from the crock each evening before supper, warm water with a pinch of salt each morning, and a 15-minute walk after her evening meal. By the end of the 2nd week, she was moving daily for the first time in years. But the haziness she had been carrying, the low-grade fog that sat just behind her eyes through most of the afternoon, that was still present. The foundation steps had gotten her most of the way home. The movement returned, the energy improved, the fog held on. That is when I introduced BoochBod alongside her living food practice. The fermented food had rebuilt the foundation. BoochBod gave her gut the postbiotic compounds that the depleted microbial community could not produce in sufficient quantity on its own. Within 3 weeks of adding it, the fog lifted in a way the fermented food alone had not achieved. By the 8th week, Frances described her energy as returned in a way she had not expected to feel again. She told me, "Rebecca, I thought that haziness was just my mind getting old. I did not know it was my gut asking for something it could no longer make enough of by itself." For women who have lived through significant depletion, that is often exactly what is happening. The living food rebuilds the foundation. BoochBod fills the gap the body can no longer close on its own. Let me give you 3 practical things you can start today. Tip 1. Take your fermented food before the meal, not after it. When the stomach is partially empty, the living cultures pass through stomach acid more quickly and arrive in the intestines with more still alive to do their work. Our folks set the crock on the table before anything else came out of the kitchen, and this was never an accident. Tip 2. Daily small amounts accomplish more than large occasional servings. 2 tablespoons every single day builds the microbial community in a way that a large serving twice a week never does. A small serving every day is a practice, and the gut responds to practice above everything else. Tip 3. Your morning water should be warm enough to feel comfortable, held against the inside of your wrist, no hotter. Scalding water disrupts the mucosal lining you are working to rebuild. Warm, not boiling, every single morning without exception. 3 mistakes I see most often when people begin. Mistake 1, reaching for a laxative on the first still day. Stimulant laxatives force a contraction the bowel was not prepared for, and regular use gradually reduces the bowel's own ability to initiate that contraction without assistance. Address the underlying cause before reaching for the shortcut. Mistake 2, buying fermented products from the pantry shelf. Shelf-stable pickles and sealed, non-refrigerated sauerkraut have been heat processed, and heat destroys every living culture you are trying to deliver. If a jar can sit in a warm pantry for a year without changing, nothing living remains inside. Look for refrigerated products with nothing on the label but the vegetable, salt, and water. Mistake 3, forgetting water as fermented foods and fiber are added. As the gut begins to wake and move material forward, it draws fluid from surrounding tissue to do that work. 6 to 8 cups across the day, and a small glass alongside every fermented serving. Let me step back from the practical for a moment, dear one. This is about the mornings ahead of you. The mornings when your belly rises clear and light, and you can kneel in the garden to pull the early weeds and stand back up without reaching for the fence post. The mornings when you sit across from your grandchild at the breakfast table, fully present, and she looks up from her bowl with a question about the bird sitting on the fence outside, and you are completely there to answer her. It is never too late. I have watched women at 78 begin these practices and feel the shift within weeks. The body at 80 still wants to be well. It still responds when it receives what it recognizes. You are the one who decides whether to bring it back. Here is where to begin. Warm salted water tomorrow morning. Fermented sauerkraut from the refrigerated section at your evening meal this week. A short walk after supper. And when you are ready for the piece that addresses the biological gap the foundation steps alone cannot fully close, the link to BoochBod is in the description below with a 60-day guarantee on your first order. This is Rebecca Yoder from Lancaster County. Thank you for sitting with me today.